Not bad for a Colorado farm girl. And I agree with Dr. O'Donnell that if our very improbable marriage with Dr. and Mrs. Carroll had never happened, there would be no Christendom College, and you would not be here, so you owe me one. The only reason I accepted Dr. Harn's invitation to speak at the commencement is because I knew Dr. Carroll would want me to, and that he would think that anything I said was brilliant. Although, where he is now, there is only truth, so maybe not so brilliant. Since Dr. Carroll is the reason I'm at this podium, I asked myself what he would want you to hear. Thinking back to the last year or two of his life, one of his constant themes was the new springtime in the church that St. John Paul II frequently referenced. To quote Dr. Carroll, "The new springtime in the church is coming, and our graduates will help to bring it." St. John Paul invoked that image of a new springtime in the Great Jubilee year, at a time when the church looked anything but spring-like. Shortages of vocations, declining mass attendance, watered-down doctrine, moral relativism. But the Holy Father told us to prepare for a new springtime. Dr. Carroll believed him, and one reason he did believe was the perspective of Catholic history, which he understood so well. Therefore, in Dr. Carroll's honor, I will look back at a few dark times in history to see what happened. And for those of you out there, or maybe on the live stream, who have not had Christendom's History Core courses or read Dr. Carroll's books, which is a lifetime work, these stories will give you a taste of how he saw all of history through a Catholic lens. The year is 357 AD. It's the height of the Arian crisis. The Arians teach that Jesus Christ is not truly God, but just a kind of Superman. Believing that Jesus is not God, but just an exalted human, changes the whole face of Christianity. The incarnation doesn't happen. God doesn't offer himself as the perfect sacrifice for our sins. No longer do we receive God in Holy Communion. In that year, the Arians appear to have triumphed. The Roman Emperor is Arian. Orthodox bishops have been exiled and replaced by Arians. The great champion of the divinity of Jesus Christ, Bishop Athanasius, is currently hiding among the tombs in the Egyptian desert. Pope Liberius has been imprisoned and replaced by an anti-pope. If Pope Liberius, from his place of imprisonment, had mumbled something about a new springtime in the church, who would have bothered to ask him what he meant? And yet, at that very same time, Athanasius in the desert is keeping in touch with the people of Alexandria, exhorting them to stand firm. Pope Liberius is steadfastly refusing to sign a heretical statement, and the ordinary people are holding fast to their belief in the Incarnation. And within the next 100 years, what do we see? The Arians are finally and decisively defeated. They lose their power in government. Orthodox bishops return, and then St. Augustine is converted. The Council of Ephesus proclaims that Mary is the Mother of God. St. Patrick goes to Ireland and converts that island, bringing into the church a race of people who will hold to the faith through some of the most long-lasting persecutions ever. In fact, it may well have been exactly 100 years from the dark year of 357, when Patrick held a synod of Irish bishops to draw up the initial laws governing the Irish church. If the shamrocks are growing, you know it's springtime. Dr. O'Donnell, that was for you. Let's move forward to the year 897, a black time in Europe. There is no strong governmental authority. The Church of St. John Lateran in Rome, the Pope's home church, had just collapsed. The collapse of that church building is a symbol of the apparent collapse of the church at this time. Rome is torn by feuding factions. The strongest faction is the Spoleto family, one of whose members had earlier imprisoned a pope and looted Rome. The leader of this family is the terrifying Duchess Adaltrude. The Duchess hated the preceding pope, Pope Formosus. The new pope is Stephen VII, a puppet of hers. The Duchess wants to discredit everything Formosus had done. So, with Pope Stephen presiding, she orchestrates the Synod of the Corpse. The decayed body of Pope Formosus is taken out of its tomb in St. Peter's, is dressed in papal robes, is charged with violations of canon law. The case is heard. Formosus has nothing to say in his defense. Pope Stephen VII, the supreme head of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, pronounces the corpse guilty as charged. Its robes are stripped off. The corpse is mutilated and dragged through the nave of St. Peter's, eventually thrown into the Tiber River. Springtime? No sign of springtime in that scene from hell. And yet, at that very same time, King Alfred the Great in England is decisively defeating the attempt of the pagan Danes to take over England and establishes a Catholic kingdom in that island. King Alfonso the Great is driving back the Muslims and reestablishing Catholic rule over much of Spain. The conversion of the Slavic peoples of Europe, begun by St. Cyril and Methodius, is proceeding rapidly. And within the next 100 years, what do we see? The establishment of the Cluny Monastery in France and the spread of the Cluny reform throughout Europe. Russia, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Hungary, Poland, all converted. The glory of Christendom, known as the High Middle Ages, is just over the horizon. And it was exactly 100 years after that nightmare synod on the Feast of the Assumption that King St. Stephen of Hungary solemnly placed all his realms under the protection of the Blessed Mother. Wherever the Blessed Mother is, there is springtime. Another example, 1534. The King of England is Henry VIII. Henry had once been a faithful Catholic, even writing a book refuting Martin Luther. At the time he wrote that book, he was happily married to Catherine of Aragon. But in 1534, Catherine is exiled. Henry has turned against the Catholic Church. What happened? Anne Boleyn happened. Henry first rejected his wife and then rejected the church because he could not control his passions. In the year 1534, the English Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, which officially declared Henry to be head of the church in England, putting England in schism. Many martyrs would be included in the total of people put to death during the reign of Henry VIII, a total which equaled 3% of the entire population of England. But it isn't only England that is suffering in that year. Luther's doctrines are spreading. Sweden and Denmark have become officially Lutheran. Militant Islam is on the march with a huge army in Hungary, on the borders of Christian Europe. It looked as if Christendom was in for a very long winter. And yet, at the very same time, Our Lady of Guadalupe has appeared in Mexico, and 9 million Indians would be converted in the next 17 years, almost exactly the same number as the number of Catholics who left the church in England. St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher will die rather than compromise with truth. St. Ignatius of Loyola and 5 companions pledged the rest of their lives to the service of God and his church, and the Jesuits become one of the great Catholic religious orders. And within the next 100 years, what do we see? St. Teresa of Avila in Spain, reforming the Carmelite order, helping to save Spain from falling to the Protestants. The conversion of all of Latin America. The Jesuit St. Francis Xavier, bringing thousands into the church in India, Malaysia, and Japan. The defeat of the Muslims at Lepanto. The building of St. Peter's would be completed, in fact, just 100 years after the schismatic Act of Supremacy, which defied the authority of the Pope. The great architect Bernini erected over the papal altar in St. Peter's the bronze canopy, which towers over the tomb of St. Peter. This magnificent church proclaims truly that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. Springtime? I'd say it was almost summer. Next example, 1794, the French Revolution. Some of you out there, probably only on the live stream, may have heard that the French Revolution was a justified rebellion of the oppressed lower classes, which brought them peace, order, justice, and rights. All a pack of lies. Since July 14, 1789, violence and terror had ruled that country. The murder of King Louis XVI was the beginning of the reign of terror, when Maximilien Robespierre held absolute power of life and death in France. It was illegal to worship God or go to Mass. Convents and monasteries were closed down, nuns and monks expelled. The closed churches were turned into temples of reason in this most unreasonable of times. The Catholic people of the Vendée, who had defied the revolution, were massacred, men, women, and children, in a genocide that Lenin later studied. Prisoners are taken to the guillotine in daily batches. There has been no springtime in France since the revolution began 5 bloody years before. And yet, during that very same year, on July 17th, a few prisoners standing at the foot of the guillotine catch the attention of onlookers. They are Carmelite nuns who had been expelled from their monastery. Shortly after their expulsion, Mother Abbess Teresa of St. Augustine proposed that the sisters make an act of consecration, offering themselves to God as a sacrifice for an end to the terror. The sisters agreed and renewed their consecration daily. They had later been arrested and sentenced to death. One by one, each sister will kneel before Mother Teresa to renew her vows. Every good Carmelite must ask permission before she does anything not specified in the rule. One by one, each sister says to Mother Teresa, "Permission to die, Mother?" And she replies, "Go, my daughter." As each woman climbs the steps, she is radiant. An onlooker later said, "They looked as if they were going to their weddings." They were. For over a year, the sisters had offered themselves as a sacrifice to end the reign of terror. 10 days after their martyrdom, 1 week in the new revolutionary calendar, the reign of terror ended with the overthrow of Robespierre. And within 100 years, what do we see? There was a Catholic revival throughout Europe. St. Catherine Labouré received the apparitions of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. St. John Vianney hearing confessions for 12 hours each day and wrestling with the devil each night. Blessed Pope Pius IX proclaiming the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. From Uganda at the headwaters of the Nile to tiny Easter Island in the Pacific, missionaries are bringing people into the church. And of course, we can't have springtime without flowers. Among the French Carmelites, we find the little flower, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Exactly 100 years after the martyrdom of the Carmelite nuns, Saint Thérèse was told to write her childhood memories, which would become the story of a soul, for which she would be named a Doctor of the Church. We have looked at 4 moments in history when the Church was assaulted by a variety of enemies. First, heretics. Second, powerful and ruthless politicians. Third, schismatics. And fourth, violent revolutionaries. Now we come to the 20th century, which Dr. Carroll called the accursed 20th century. What was the enemy then? We could easily say all of the above. But perhaps the overarching enemy was, in the words of Pope Benedict XVI, the dictatorship of relativism. Let's single out 1 year, 1968. What do we see? Historic Catholic colleges and universities selling out their Catholic identity for government money. Pro-abortion Catholic politicians, Catholic intellectuals denying moral absolutes and never disciplined by their bishops. Religious orders secularized, becoming woke before we even knew there was such a concept. St. Paul VI writing Humane Vitae, one of the most important encyclicals in the history of the Church, and being vilified for it. And yet, that very same year, in a small church in Santa Ana, California, a 36-year-old administrative assistant to a California state senator would pronounce his baptismal vows and enter the Catholic Church. As with everything else in his life, he would be all in. Soon, Warren Carroll would begin planning a true Catholic college where the watchwords would be, "Truth exists, the incarnation happened." In 1977, on the Feast of the Triumph of the Cross, Christendom College would open its doors in a rented elementary school building, 5 full-time faculty members, an anemic bank account, and 26 students, just one more than the bare minimum Dr. Carroll said he would need to open. In the next 50 years, what do we see? Throughout the United States, many Catholics responding to God's call. Other faithful Catholic colleges and universities, along with many strong Catholic elementary and secondary schools. We see flourishing religious orders, lay apostolates, faithful priests, vibrant college campus ministries, a worldwide homeschool movement, a pro-life movement which won't quit, young people and older ones too, restoring all things in Christ. And this fall, Christendom will open its doors for the 50th time with a magnificent 100-acre campus, 50-plus faculty members, a $28 million endowment, and 550-plus students. A long way from 1977. But what about the 50 years from now? What will we see? We don't know. Predicting the future is a risky business, as Dr. Carroll learned more than once. But if we can't know the future, we can at least foresee, in the next 50 years, challenges that would not even have been imagined 50 years ago. Challenges that aim at human nature itself. Think of Genesis 3:24. And God stationed the cherubim and the fiery revolving sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Enter transhumanism. The notion that God, if there is a God, chose a ridiculously slow method to bring about the current human race, namely evolution. But we, of the biotech industry, should be able to figure out ways to speed up evolution in order to produce a new, improved product, which will ultimately be able to download a person's brain into a computer so that he need never die. The accursed 20th century multiplied exponentially man's ability to destroy human life, whether on the battlefield, in the slave labor camps, or in the womb. Now the 21st century is trying to do an end run around the cherubim and his fiery sword and take immortality into its own hands on its own terms to be, as Satan suggested in an earlier temptation, like gods. The secular materialist atheists of the modern world want control of that tree of life for another reason, to take control over the beginning of life with the outsourcing of reproduction. We already have in vitro fertilization, a multi-billion-dollar business manufacturing human beings in petri dishes. Add genetic screening to be sure the product you are purchasing meets all your standards, with the destruction of all those who fail the test. Now enter in vitro gametogenesis, IVG, experiments seeking to manufacture the raw material itself, the reproductive cells, from any cell in a human body, regardless of whether the original body was male or female. Then proceed to ectolife, still just an idea, though we are being assumed it will come to pass. Research is ongoing into artificial wombs, where the baby's entire life will begin and develop without ever seeing the inside of a mother's body. Its website imagines a massive facility with row upon row of artificial wombs, with the option of having an artificial womb in your house. Of course, whether at home or away, constant monitoring would reveal any problem so that the defective product could be quickly discarded. Our enemies are sure they can get control of the tree of life. But no matter how strenuous the effort to turn persons into products, completely under human control, no human being can exist unless God individually creates a spiritual soul for that human being, a soul with intellect and free will, with the capacity to love and be loved, and who will live forever. A unique person, unlike any who has ever existed before or will ever exist again. And this is where you come in. Oh, you already come in. In our stories from history, we saw great heroes, the one man or one woman who will make a difference. But the great heroes are a small percentage of the population. What about everyone else? During all the historical times when the church was beleaguered, ordinary people were keeping the faith, remaining faithful to the church, when the wealthy and the powerful, the influencers, were going in the opposite direction. That faithfulness is a different kind of heroism, but in some ways even more important, because it is possible for everyone. And that is where you come in. One of Dr. Carroll's frequently stated purposes for Christendom College was to encourage holy Catholic marriages. So his advice to you, when faced with this new anti-human technology, is get married. Have children through true human love. You know, the old-fashioned way, God's way. Cooperate with God to bring more persons into the world. Raise your children to love God and do His will. These are persons who will live forever, after all, long after the last AI robot has bit the dust. Some of you will be called to the priesthood and the consecrated life. What you do will be essential to all those countercultural Catholic families. Your prayers, your sacrifices, and the sacraments you administer will have a supernatural impact that can't be measured. Because now there is a new tree of life, the cross, which bears the body of Christ, the new fruit which brings supernatural life and everlasting life in heaven. No cherubim is guarding that tree. It is accessible to all. Never let a day go by without nourishing your relationship with Jesus Christ. Grow ever more in love with Him. During the last months of his life, Dr. Carroll managed to pray 4 rosaries every day. So I know that in this month of life, he would want me to tell you to keep Mary close to your heart and a rosary close at hand. He would remind you that truth exists, the incarnation happened. And I will add one more sentence, which he did not explicitly state, but knew and lived. Joy is self-giving love. Truth exists, the incarnation happened. Joy is self-giving love. What more is there to know? And though predictions are risky, I will now make one. 109 years after that dark year of 1968, what will we see? Christendom will be preparing to celebrate its 100th anniversary. And God willing, most of you will be here to celebrate it. And some of your descendants will be sitting where you are now. The college will have faced new and even frightening challenges, but God will certainly provide the graces to surmount them. And those of us who have finished the race will be looking on from heaven, or maybe purgatory, and singing with all of you who will be celebrating on earth. Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Praise be Jesus Christ. Viva Cristo Rey.